The largest thermonuclear bomb ever detonated didn't do anything close to that, and it was exploded right here in our atmosphere. Whereas WR104 is 8,000 light years away. You can't even see it with your naked eye or a pair of binoculars. But gamma-ray bursts are merely brief events lasting only a few minutes at most, sometimes just a matter of milliseconds. If you want the brightest, sustained thing, you'll paradoxically have to look at the darkest thing: black holes. To be fair, dark matter is ostensibly darker, but because dark matter has been hypothesized to not even interact with light, with electromagnetism at all, calling dark matter not bright is kind of like calling your peanut butter sandwich a not fast airplane. It's not really even the same category. Black holes, however, do interact with light, reflecting so little, well, they don't let any escape, at least not in a form resembling the way it came in. That's dark. But the intense energies created by black holes in the process of eating things like stars is anything but dark. Gas and debris from the stars they eat swirl into archipluvian cosmic gallows known as accretion disks before making their final death plunge into the black hole. In the disk, debris spins at unfathomable speeds, pulled around by a black hole billions of times more massive than our sun. Friction in millions of stars. The first identified quasar, 3C273, has an absolute magnitude of negative 26.7, making it 4 trillion times brighter than our sun, about 100 times more luminous than the total amount of light produced by the entire Milky Way. If you put 3C273 33 light years away from us, it would shine as brightly as our sun, a mere 8 light minutes away. Blocking the brightness of a quasar with a coronagraph reveals that quasars exist in the centers of galaxies that are larger than them in area, but are nonetheless drowned out by their light. Such galactic centers are called active galactic nuclei, the bulk of their energy spewing forth in the form of a powerful radiation jet, the length of which puts even our solar system to shame. The visible part of the jet in this photograph, for instance, is so long it could stretch from the sun to Pluto and back 1.5 million times. Now, specifically, if a large portion of this ejected energy heads toward Earth, it's responsible for what we call a quasar. But if Earth is right in the active galactic nucleus's sights, it's got a scarier name: a blazar. And it's blazar 3C454.3 that clocked in the greatest brightness ever observed. At historically high levels of activity, it registered an absolute magnitude of negative 31.4. To put the brightness of quasars in yet another perspective, take a look at the 100,000th picture snapped by the Hubble telescope. This is a star a few hundred light years away, and this thing looks just about as bright, but it is a quasar 9 billion light years away. Why are quasars so far away? Well, a quasar is not forever. They are billions of light years away, which means the light we receive from them, the pictures we take of them, are pictures of things happening billions of years ago. They represent a phenomenon more common early in the universe's history, when monster black holes hadn't eaten all the stars around them to fuel their accretion disks, and before those holes became too fat to be active. Neil deGrasse Tyson points out that in order to remain a quasar producer, a black hole must consume about 10 stars a year. Many consume more than 1,000 stars a year, 600 Earths worth of matter every single minute. The more stars a black hole consumes, the larger its event horizon becomes, until eventually it no longer shreds stars apart to fuel an accretion disk. Instead, it just swallows them whole in one dimmer but still terrifying gulp. Quasars are some of the most ancient things in our universe. If you could teleport instantaneously to one right now, faster than light, it would most likely no longer be burning. What we see are just their ghosts, light that left when they were active, that traveled longer than they could live. But quasars can still be born. They can even be born right here, in fact. In my video, What Will We Miss?, I pointed out that the Andromeda Galaxy is headed our way. In 3 to 5 billion years, it will collide with our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and the collision could rearrange stars near the galaxy's central black holes to be consumed, reigniting a quasar right here in our galactic backyard. Funny enough, right now, very few of us even see Andromeda, even though all you need is your unaided eye. Light from our cities drowns out the night sky like a quasar drowns out its host galaxy. Artist Thierry Cohen mocked up what big cities would look like if all their lights were off and the sky above them could be seen fully. New York, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tokyo, Los Angeles. It's beautiful and rare. In the 1990s, during a blackout in the city of Los Angeles, a number of residents actually called the police. They were afraid of mysterious glowing clouds hovering above the city. They were seeing our galaxy for the first time in their lives. At night, artificial lights allow us to see what's around us, but we lose what's above us. The brightest places have the darkest, emptiest skies. There's yin and yang again. A Taiji has actually been lurking in this video the entire time. The brightest things in the universe, quasars, are caused by the darkest things in the universe, black holes. The process that unshackles the most light is caused by the thing that best imprisons it. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. Nyctophobia is the fear of the dark. But there's another fear that's more chilling. It's the fear that darkness will go away. Optophobia, the fear of opening your eyes. Light travels at the fastest speed possible for a physical object. Darkness is erased when light appears and returns when light leaves. The speed of dark is the speed of light, but there are other types of darkness that can move faster than light speed. For instance, a shadow. Across a distance, a shadow can become much larger than the object creating it, but still mimic its source, moving in the same way for the same amount of time. So when a shadow is bigger than the object casting it, it moves a greater distance when the object moves, but in the same amount of time. Make a shadow large enough and it can travel across a surface faster than light. If you, here on Earth, cast a shadow onto the moon, not an easy thing to do, that pointed from, say, point A on the moon's surface, and then you moved your finger so that the shadow moved to point B, your finger would only move a few centimeters in a fraction of a second, but the shadow it cast on the moon would move thousands of kilometers in the same amount of time. Do it right, and you're easily producing a shadow that breaks the light barrier. But nothing's wrong here. The rule is that information can't travel faster than light. You can't cause something to happen somewhere else faster than light could travel from you to that somewhere else. And our superluminal shadow is transferring no information from point A to point B. Sure, point B is being cast into darkness sooner than a light-speed message from A could warn him it's coming, but darkness isn't traveling from point A to point B. It's traveling from you to point A and point B at the speed of light. What we tend to call a shadow is really just a cross-section of a three-dimensional region. The darkness you are causing only changes shape when newly unblocked light fills the previous gap. That's all a shadow is, a gap. So in a way, a shadow doesn't travel at all. That's an illusion caused by us thinking that a shadow is a physical thing, when in reality, a shadow is just the lack of physical things, photons, which chug along at the speed limit of the universe. But that doesn't mean two shadows can't kiss, or at least look like they are. Watch as Guy brings two shadows near each other. Right before they actually make contact, the shadows seem to magically bulge toward one another in a sort of smooch of darkness. What's going on is the shadow blister effect, and it has to do with the anatomy of a shadow. The region where an object completely blocks a light source is called the umbra. It's the darkest part of a shadow and the most prototypical part of the shadow. Where only a portion of the light source is blocked, we find the fainter penumbra. But as two or more penumbras approach and overlap, the combined amount of light they block can be enough to produce a perceivable difference, the shadow blister. The Earth has a big umbra. It's 1.4 million kilometers long. That's how far away you'd have to be from the Earth for it to no longer have a large enough apparent diameter to block out all of the sun. Here, on the surface of Earth, we are nowhere near that far away, which is why night is so umbral. Night is just the Earth's shadow falling on you. A U-eclipse. Sunsets are cool, they're beautiful to look at, but look the other way and you can see the lumbering shadow of our planet. Our atmosphere scatters shorter wavelengths of light more than longer wavelengths, which makes the sky appear blue. But in Earth's shadow, there's less light to scatter and the sky appears darker. During twilight, you can see the demarcation. While driving east from Denver to Kansas City, I got a particularly great view of it. This is Earth's approaching night-making shadow. The beautiful pink band above it, that's the belt of Venus. It's caused by the sky reflecting the colors of the sunset behind us. You've probably noticed that right after the sun sets and disappears from view, there's still light in the sky, scattered from the no longer visible sun. This is what we call twilight, and there are many different stages of twilight. If the sun is less than 6 degrees below the horizon, it's technically civil twilight. You can still do plenty of stuff outdoors without the need for artificial lights. Down to 12 degrees below the horizon, we have nautical twilight. Artificial lights are more or less necessary, but the sky still scatters enough light to be bright enough for ships at sea to navigate by seeing a contrast at the horizon between dark sea and faintly lit sky. Down to 18 degrees, an astronomical twilight is occurring. It looks like night, but the sky can still get darker. Until astronomical twilight ends, not all nighttime astronomical observations can be made. Below 18 degrees is technically, honestly, night. If you live at greater than 48.5 degrees north or south latitude, during the summer, the sun never goes more than 18 degrees below the horizon. It's never technically night. Places like London only reach astronomical twilight at the most during these months. So if you live in one of these areas and you want to avoid doing something during the summer, just tell people you'll do it tonight. You'll buy yourself a few weeks. But that's slow darkness. Let's cut to the chase because we are looking for fast darkness. When scissor blades snip, the intersection point between both blades moves faster than the blades themselves. Think of it this way. If you had a pair of scissors with blades that were a light year long, and it took 1 second to close them, the intersection point would have traveled an entire light year in not a year, but a second. No laws are being broken here because such a snip would be physically impossible. As I've mentioned before, rigid objects don't move instantaneously all over when a push force is applied to them. Instead, that force moves via electromagnetic forces from one atom to the next and so on down the line, a compression wave that travels at the speed of sound through the material. But what if we ignored that problem by allowing the blades to simply be separately already in motion? Well, their point of intersection can still travel faster than light because it's not a physical thing. It's just a geometric point, and it carries no more information than you could already gather by witnessing the approaching blades. But don't count out that geometric point of intersection just yet. It's the key to another type of darkness that can move faster than light. When waves collide, their crests can fuse into larger crests, their troughs into larger troughs. This is constructive interference. But crests colliding with troughs cancel out. Destructive interference. If these waves are light, the result is darkness. And in certain circumstances, darkness created this way can travel like the intersection between two lines, faster than light. Imagine these concentric circles as waves of light. The lines are wave crests, and the gaps in between are troughs. When they meet, the points where they intersect flee up and down faster than the waves travel, especially in the middle, which in the case of light waves makes them faster than light. The superluminal speeds of these dark patches can be seen really clearly if we make the wave crests of one source black as well as the background. Overlapping regions where red peeks through represent destructive interference, darkness. And you can see how, especially in the middle, this darkness races up and down faster than the waves. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed a bank in Pittsburgh. He was caught because his only disguise was lemon juice. He covered his face with it. He knew that lemon juice could be used as an invisible ink when writing on paper revealed by heating. And he knew so little about why that worked, and he knew so little about how cameras worked, that he assumed with extreme confidence that lemon juice could make him invisible too. Seriously. Wheeler is an extreme example and was the inspiration for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Novices, people unskilled in particular disciplines, will often overestimate their knowledge and abilities in said disciplines because they don't even know how little they know, how much more there is to learn. On the flip side, experts in particular fields will often underestimate their knowledge, have less confidence in their abilities, or think that everyone else has the same level of knowledge that they do. What drives the Dunning-Kruger effect is the fact that often, the more you learn about something, the more you realize just how rich and complex and overwhelming and full of as-of-yet unanswered questions it really is. George Bernard Shaw once famously toasted Albert Einstein by saying, "Science is always wrong. It never solves a problem without creating 10 more." Einstein didn't exactly disagree. He used geometry to illustrate how ignorance grows faster than knowledge, saying, as our circle of knowledge expands, so does the circumference of darkness surrounding it. Learning, studying, shedding light on a field of inquiry also reveals just how in the dark we continue to be, how many shadowy things there are left for us to illuminate. The diameter of light never exceeds the shadowy circumference. But what's the speed of that kind of dark? The speed of the growth of the number of things we know we are in the dark about. What's the speed of ignorance? If we define ignorance as the difference between questions we know to ask and answers we have, the field of agnotology, the study of ignorance, suggests that the amount of things we know we are in the dark about is growing faster than the amount of things we have shed light on. Is it a coincidence that the phrase "in the dark" originated during, of all ages, the Age of Enlightenment? When Leeuwenhoek put a scraping from his tooth under a collection of magnifying lenses he built, he saw, for the first time in human history, little moving creatures, microorganisms. He called them animalcules. The discovery shed light on why food spoiled. Life didn't spontaneously come from old meat. It was already there, we just couldn't see it. but the discovery also showed us that we were in the dark about an entirely new realm of biology. As Philippe Bourdeau has poetically put it, enlightenment leads to benightedness. Science entails nescience. What's really cool about the expanding size of our nescient circumference is what Stuart Firestone, the chair of biological sciences at Columbia University, has said about it. It is there that science begins, where the facts run out, just beyond them. He says it is a mistake to bob around in the circle of facts instead of riding the wave to the great expanse lying outside the circle. If science is a road trip, facts are the photos we take along the way. The fuel that drives it forward is ignorance. Facts? More like facts. Part of the past, not the way forward. When it comes to understanding our world, knowing why is obsolesced by asking why. Knowing facts makes you right, but the equally quick, sometimes quicker, and most rewarding prize is the dark. In admitting that you don't know everything, but that you'd like to know some of it. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey, Vsauce Michael here, and when the pyramids of Giza were built, the tallest was 147 meters tall, making them the tallest things humans had ever built. And they remained that way for nearly 4,000 years. It wasn't even until the 1300s that we finally got around to making something taller, a cathedral in England. So, does that mean that the Great Pyramids of Giza are the best, tallest structures of all time? Well, to find out more, all aboard the boat. So, what is a building? Well, technically, a building is a structure in which at least 50% of its height comes from floor plates where people can live, work, chill out. It has to be habitable. Any less than that, and it's not a building, it's a tower. After the Lincoln Cathedral finally surpassed the height of the pyramids, a number of churches continued to be built that kept breaking and setting new records. The next long-term record holder was the Eiffel Tower. It was the tallest thing ever in history that we had built for about 40 years in a row. It was finally surpassed by the Chrysler Building in New York, a personal favorite, which was then quickly bested by the Empire State Building. Now, the Empire State Building is interesting in that it was the first structure ever built by man that was so tall, were you to jump off the top of it, you would actually reach terminal velocity before you hit the bottom. It was the first structure we'd ever built that was so tall, rather than just continuing to accelerate as you fell, you would actually stop accelerating because you would reach the fastest possible speed your limp body can fall at. In the mid-1950s, something weird started to happen. Humans started to build radio and TV towers. These things could be way taller than the buildings that we'd made previously that had to be habitable. And so, ever since the Empire State Building had its record broken by a TV tower, all these other famously tall buildings, the Petronas Towers, Taipei 101, the World Trade Center, the Willis Tower, formerly Sears Tower, none of them have ever within their existence actually held the title for being the tallest thing we've ever built. There was always a radio or TV tower somewhere that was taller. Up until quite recently, and for quite a while, the record for the tallest thing ever built by humans went to the Warsaw Radio Mast in Poland. It's visually incredibly striking because there aren't any other skyscrapers around it. It's all alone, being very tall. Well, that was until 1991, where some workers exchanging guy wires made a mistake and the whole thing started to bend and then snapped in the middle. There's no video of the event happening, but it would have been similar to this collapse, though much, much taller. After the Warsaw radio mast collapsed, the KVLY TV mast in North Dakota became the tallest, still standing structure built by man. But recently, buildings have made a comeback, and to check that out, we're going to have to travel to the Middle East.
This is the first time I've ever touched the Nile.
Ta-da! Okay, so that was me dipping my waterproof camera into the Nile. If you were to take the entire length of the Nile River and stand it up on its edge, perpendicular to the Earth, it would reach into outer space about this far. It's pretty impressive. But where does the space shuttle orbit? And where does the International Space Station orbit? This far away? This far away? Maybe this far away. Actually, if this pink, inflatable, horrible boss's ball was the Earth, the space shuttle would orbit about right there. It's incredible, but it's possible because the shuttle and the International Space Station travel so quickly. They travel so quickly around the Earth that instead of seeing one sunrise and sunset every 24 hours, they see 16. But don't be jealous. You can easily see more than one sunrise and or sunset in a day by taking advantage of tall structures. So let's take a look at the tallest structure, the current record holder for the tallest thing humans have ever built, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. The height of this building blows my mind. You can literally watch the sunset from the base of the building and then take a super fast elevator all the way up to the top and watch the same sun set again. In fact, the difference in timing between sunset at the base and the top is so significant, the Dubai Islamic Affairs Department actually had to make a ruling about when you can start and break your fast during Ramadan inside the building. People above floor 80 or higher have to actually wait to start eating 2 to 3 minutes after the people at the base because the sun hasn't yet set for those at the top. But before you head to Dubai to watch the sun rise or set twice in a day, keep in mind that the only height you actually need to see 2 sunrises or sunsets is the height of your own body. Try this the next time you're at a beach. Watch the sun rise or set over the water. Water is important because it won't have the terrain and hill issues that land does. Now let's say you're watching a sunset. Begin by laying on your stomach. Watch the sun set, and as soon as the very last little bit of the sun goes below the horizon, quickly pop up into a standing position, and voila, you'll see the sun's back, part of it's back, and it will set another time. If you take a stopwatch and record the time between the first setting and the second setting that you witness, and measure the height of your eyes when you're laying down and when you're standing, you can use those numbers to calculate the radius of the Earth. XKCD took this a little bit further by proposing the double sunset date. Take your date out to the beach in a cherry picker, and sure enough, it was calculated. Given the speed of a cherry picker, all you have to do is move about 6 feet up, and you can watch a beautiful sunset all over again. To put things in perspective, the Burj Khalifa is nowhere near as tall as Mount Everest, but the tallest structure that we could potentially build wouldn't be as tall as Mount Everest. It would be way, way taller, like into space taller. Of course, the problem with building things that are really tall is that they get heavier and heavier and have to support their own weight. But only up to a point. If a structure was so tall that it wound up at the altitude of a geostationary orbit, it would start to feel a new force, not just a gravitational force downward, but all of a sudden this new centrifugal force up and outward. And so a building that tall could be stable through tension and more than 35,000 kilometers high. This kind of structure is known as a space elevator. Unfortunately, there aren't any materials known to science today that are strong enough to make building something that large feasible, with the exception maybe of carbon nanotubes or boron nitride nanotubes. Of course, if we went to a smaller celestial body like the moon, we could build one today out of stuff like Kevlar. There are a lot of different things that we have to be wary of when we build a space elevator. For instance, how do we dodge space debris? One solution is to attach the Earth side of the cable to a boat in the ocean that can maneuver around and move the elevator away from dangerous obstacles. Another interesting point is that the taller the cable, the faster the far end of it will be traveling. In fact, if the cable is more than 50,000 kilometers long, its far end will be traveling near escape velocity, and simply walking outside could take you to the moon. But why build a space elevator? Well, because it would be awesome. But also for better reasons too. For instance, right now, in order to send a pound of material into orbit, it costs about $11,000. But with a space elevator, you could send the same amount of material into orbit for only about $100. That difference is so significant that Philip Reagan has said that the first country to deploy a space elevator will have a 95% cost advantage and will possibly be able to control all space-related activities. Yeah. All right, so here you see in the mirror Alex playing guitar while she holds a camera in her mouth and records us. Impressive. I'm here with Kristen from Barely Political. She's visiting London. And if you enjoyed this episode of Boat, check out other episodes. I've got them all up there.
And as always, thanks for watching.
Oh, and check out Kristen's channel right there.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. 10 centimeters, about 4 inches. This is how much taller, on average, people are today than they were 150 years ago. Better nutrition and medical care early in life has allowed us to better take advantage of the blueprints within our genes. Blueprints that carry plans for just how big a healthy human being can get given an optimal environment. In terms of height, those plans rarely exceed 7 feet 6 inches. But individuals with endocrine disorders, for instance a tumor near the pituitary gland in the brain, can experience growth that occurs more rapidly and for a longer period of time than usual. For instance, Igor Vovkovinsky, who at 7 foot 8 inches is the tallest man currently living in America. The tallest living person anywhere on Earth is Sultan Kosin, who at 8 foot 3 inches tall also holds the Guinness World Record for largest hands and feet. But the tallest person ever officially recorded was Robert Wadlow. He was the size of an average adult male when he entered kindergarten at the age of 5. When he died in 1940 at the age of 22, he was 8 foot 11 inches tall. Andre the Giant was 7'4", and this is me holding a 12-ounce can. Here's Andre doing the same. Human size variation is fascinating, but what's the maximum? Biologically, how big can a human get? And more importantly, how big are you, really? It turns out that today, now in history, average human height is probably quite near the genetic limit. By manipulating the very genes responsible for height, we may be able to add an extra 15 centimeters or so to that average, but beyond that, we are likely to hit a ceiling. In order to regularly produce people over 8 feet tall, 2.44 meters, those people would probably need to be a different shape, not human-shaped. This is because of the square cube law. As a shape grows, say taller, its volume increases at a greater rate. Take a look at this cube. If we make it 10 times larger, well, sure, it's 10 times as tall, but the area covered by its faces is 100 times larger, and its volume, the space within it, is 1,000 times larger. Now, since weight is connected to volume, this cube only has 100 times the cross-sectional area to support itself, but 1,000 times the weight to support. So if you were 10 times larger and still shaped like a person, that is, your proportions were the same as they are now, you would need to either have a skeleton made out of something stronger than bone, or bones that were monstrously thick, like way out of proportion. But even if you solved the bone and muscle strength problem, there would still be a whole host of other issues. For instance, your heart wouldn't scale up fast enough to keep blood pumping throughout a body that large. Animals can get that big because their proportions and organs are quite different. Chris Howard from Earth Unplugged tipped me off to the giant, not human proportioned legs of the largest land animal ever known to have existed with the certainty of a complete skeleton, the awesomely named Giraffatitan. Discovered in Tanzania and now mounted in Berlin's Humboldt Museum, it probably weighed 20 to 30,000 kilograms. The Brouhathkeosaurus may have been even larger, but this is controversial because we only have a few of its bones. Estimates put this guy at 140,000 kilograms. Any larger than that, and in order to survive long enough to reproduce, an animal would need more buoyancy to counteract its weight than air can provide. This is one of the reasons blue whales love the water so much. The heaviest blue whale ever measured by NMML weighed in at 177,000 kilograms, making it the heaviest animal we are aware of that has ever existed. It might be the heaviest possible because animal size is limited by simple geometry and the gravity of our planet. Theoretically, humans born on Mars could grow a few inches taller because gravity there is only 1/3 of what it is on Earth. The trade-off, of course, being that their bones and muscles wouldn't grow strong enough for them to ever visit Earth and enjoy it. The point is, in order to have the same shape and proportions that we have now, we can't really get that much bigger. Some of the higher estimates of the upper limit of average human height are around 7 feet tall. A person who was more than 9 feet tall would struggle to move around, and up in the 12 to 15 foot range, it would be difficult to live very long at all. But what does size mean? Where do you really begin and end? So far, we have been measuring people using their rigid boundaries. It's a good one to use, it's very common, but of course, when I speak, I can fill an entire room. And when I shout, I can fill city blocks. That's huge. Of course, my voice is not a part of my physical body. It's not part of the matter that fits within my skin container. But it's relevant to the question of how big a person is. How large of an impact on their environment can a person have using what comes directly from their bodies? Well, Guy Murchie illustrated this quite well in his tome, The 7 Mysteries of Life. The little solid dogs are small, but their sound and smell extend into shapes and sizes no creature could even dream of filling up with their bodies on Earth. Let's begin with sound. How far can your loudest shout travel? How much bigger are you, the volume of space within which people are aware that you exist, when you shout? Well, the loudest shout a human can make is about 88 decibels from 30 centimeters away. A shout like that will die out down below the threshold of human hearing in our atmosphere after traveling about 5 kilometers or 3 miles. A person standing downwind from you might be able to make you out a little further than that, but the point is, in space, no one can hear you scream. And on Earth, from 5 kilometers away, no one can hear you scream. But could they see you scream? Really, could they see you at all? Well, on the surface of Earth, the furthest you can see another person is the horizon. If you and another person are standing on the ground, that distance is about 5 kilometers or 3 miles. Any further away than that, and you will literally be hiding behind the curvature of the Earth. So what about in, say, outer space, where moving away from another person doesn't mean eventually hiding behind the Earth? Well, as an object moves farther and farther away, it becomes smaller and smaller. Of course, the actual size of the object doesn't change. What does change to you is its angular size. This brilliant measurement describes how much space in your visual field an object takes up. Imagine your visual field as a complete circle, 180 degrees of which go from the horizon in front of you to the horizon behind you. So an object with an angular size of 90 degrees would have to be big enough and close enough so as to take up all the space from the horizon to right above you. Interestingly, your thumb, held at an arm's length away from your face, takes up about 1 degree of your visual field. Its size is 1 degree. The moon takes up about half a degree at all times. It sometimes appears larger at the horizon, but that's because of an illusion that ASAP Science covered really well. The smallest angular size we can see with the naked eye is about 1 arc minute, a 60th of a degree. But given enough contrast, we can see things like sunspots, a mere 20 arc seconds across, a third of a 60th of a degree. Plugging in numbers to do the math will tell us that with perfect conditions, outer space, no air, no obstructions, a lot of contrast because you are wearing bright white, the farthest away a person could see you with their naked eye would be about 10 to 15 kilometers. Any further away than that, and they will have passed the edge of your naked eye visibility existence. But, do you smell that? It might be you. If we consider the senses of other animals, your smell, your scent, might be your largest earthly dimension. You know how animals like cats and dogs have those cute little wet noses? It's called a rhinarium. Wet noses. It's called a rhinarium. Rhinariums allow mammals to smell really, really well. They don't just pick up molecules that float by, they localize them. Air cools the wet nose, allowing the animal to tell the source of the smell. It's the same as when you wet your finger and stick it in the air to tell the wind's direction. A bloodhound can pick up and trace to you a scent trail that is days old, making your scent imprint on the earth about as large as you can move in a couple days. But the silver-tip grizzly has a sense of smell that is 7 times stronger than a bloodhound. These guys can smell things from 18 miles away, nearly 30 kilometers. That's probably the largest bubble we could draw around you and still call you, because it contains things that you emitted that can be traced back to you by other living things. But if we include everything you emit, well, fundamentally, we're limited to the edges of Earth's atmosphere. Because with the exception of a few light molecules, hydrogen, helium, which escape into space, not much else leaves. There's no medium in space for your sound and smells to travel through. Which brings us back to light. The human body emits light, electromagnetic radiation. Most of it is infrared light, heat, but some of it lies within the visible spectrum, though it's about 1,000 times dimmer than the dimmest light the eye can see. It seems that what little visible light you do emit is tied in some way to your circadian rhythms, meaning that around 4 p.m. every day, you are literally visibly the brightest you will be all day. But here's the thing about light, about electromagnetic radiation. It doesn't need a medium to travel through. It just keeps going out into and through space. Which of course brings us to Australia. If you're not subscribed to Derek's channel Veritasium, I don't know what you're doing with your life. It is amazing, and he recently made a video that I have not been able to stop thinking about. The smallest possible piece of light is a photon. And the human eye can kind of perceive individual photons a bit better than chance, but some frogs can see individual photons quite well. Now, in his video, he explains that as you move away from the sun, its angular size gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually you're so far away from the sun that you can no longer see it. But it's still there, and it is still emitting light that can reach your eye. Except now, that light has been spread so thin, it's not big packets of light you can see, it's just individual photons. The sun is still there, it's just less frequent. Sometimes a photon hits your eye, sometimes nothing, and sometimes a photon again. Well, the same thing happens to radiation emitted by you. I Skyped with Derek this afternoon, and he calculated that the human body, seen at a distance of 168,000 kilometers, would also be reduced to merely a few individual photons. Further than that, and your size would no longer get smaller. It would just remain individual photons flying through space. They are, after all, indivisible. So your physical size is limited by geometry and biology and gravity. Your vocal and fragrance size can be bigger, but it's still limited by the size of Earth. But your light, your personal glow, isn't really bounded by anything. The photons that you are emitting right now, the ones that don't get absorbed by anything, have no reason to ever really stop, and they can continue conceivably past even the observable universe, making you, in a way, completely huge and kind of immortal. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here, but what could be out there? The likelihood of extraterrestrial intelligence has been the subject of an equation, and the current lack of any communication with aliens the subject of a paradox. But here's a different question. If we were to hear from intelligent life beyond Earth, what would really happen next? Well, no government has ever officially adopted a post-detection policy, and when asked how they would deal with a confirmed message from extraterrestrial intelligence, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs simply said that their job does not include any issues regarding the question you pose. So are we unprepared? Would chaos ensue? These things are unlikely, but the way we prepare for and anticipate our species encountering one from beyond Earth is important and illuminating, even though improbable. Historically, we have acted as though alien life exists. Back contamination is a concern that a man-made object returning from space could carry with it undiscovered alien life forms, especially viruses and bacteria that could wipe out life on Earth. This was a serious concern felt by serious people when we first sent humans to the moon. When Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin returned from the lunar surface, they didn't immediately hug their families and join a public parade. Instead, they were sealed up in biological isolation garments and flown to a quarantine facility to be locked away for 3 weeks in Houston, Texas. By Apollo 15, the practice was discontinued, but forward contamination has also been a real concern. When NASA sent the Galileo spacecraft to survey Jupiter and its moons, it got amazing data, but there was a problem. It had never been sterilized. Because life, even liquid water, could exist on these moons, NASA made the decision to avoid contaminating an alien biosphere, and when the mission was over, steered Galileo into Jupiter, where it burned up and was destroyed, along with any Earth life possibly on board. So protocols and decisions have been officially made in the past under the assumption that aliens might exist.
When it comes to actually hearing from aliens, receiving a message from technologically advanced life forms capable of sending us, say, a radio signal, groups like SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, are the ones actively listening. They have an ear to the sky.
And they are prepared. The SETI Committee of the International Academy of Astronautics created a declaration of principles concerning activities following the detection of extraterrestrial intelligence. No government has officially adopted any of its recommendations, but if something were to happen, it would likely be the first place authorities went. It's one of the only handbooks they have. Seth Shostak explained the philosophy and atmosphere at SETI, predicting that because verifying a signal is slow and the media are fast, you will be media blasted about a possible detection days before the people who find it are certain it's for real. In the midst of rampant media speculation, elation, and panic on the part of the public, the most likely string of official events after the discovery of a message from extraterrestrial life would follow SETI recommendations. First of all, the individual or team who discovered the message would continue to assess the credibility of the message and alert all parties to SETI's declaration. Next, once they were certain the message was real, the Central Bureau of Astronomical Telegrams would be alerted, so as to inform observers all over the world. They would also inform the Secretary General of the United Nations, because Article 11 of the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the nuclear bodies, says they should. The first official news we got, the public, would likely be in terms of the Rio scale. First presented to the International Astronautical Congress, the Rio scale measures the significance of consequences of evidence of extraterrestrial life, making it a likely tool to be used because it neatly manages public reaction. There's a great online calculator you can play with to see how the Rio scale works. It takes into account the credibility of the message on a scale from believed extraterrestrial origin to hoax, how repeatable the observation is, what type of message it is, for instance, is it uninterpretable or clearly for us, and how far away it is. Is it extragalactic or near enough that we could respond and hear back within the length of a human lifetime? Seth Shostak and Ivan Almar applied the Rio scale to fictional and historical events. It's a great way to get a feel for how the Rio scale will affect the vocabulary authorities use when reporting on an extraterrestrial message. They considered the moon monolith, discovered in 2001, A Space Odyssey, a 6 on the Rio scale. Noteworthy. In the movie Independence Day, the initial unidentified signal would be about a 4 to 8, moderate to far-reaching. Once the message is confirmed to be no further than the moon and moving, it would be an automatic 10. Extraordinary. In real life, the Martian face discovered in 1976 was a 2, low, until high-resolution images from 2001 revealed it was nothing. Just a thing that looked funny under the right conditions, and was immediately downgraded to a 0. No significance. So if we were to receive a message from extraterrestrial intelligence, those things and those words would likely be used. But who would be in charge? Although she denies ever being selected or prepared for such a role, Maslin Othman, the director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, is a pretty good candidate, as is Paul Davies, the chairman of SETI's Post-Detection Task Force. Were it to be necessary, both of those people are in positions to become ambassadors for Earth-alien relations. So what do we say back? Well, if we want to show that we are intelligent, perhaps we should send back a string of information representing pi, or the Fibonacci sequence. Or maybe we shouldn't say anything at all. Stephen Hawking warned, quote, "If aliens visit us, the outcome would be much as when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans." And Professor Simon Conway Morris, a Cambridge University paleontologist, has said that if the cosmic phone rings, we shouldn't pick it up. Observations like that are at the core of the importance of this video's question. We can learn a lot by looking not just at how we prepare for a space message, but how we imagine actual contact with aliens going. Anthropologist Catherine Dimon frequently points out that the ways we imagine contact with aliens happening often says more about ourselves than it does any hypothetical aliens. We do this all the time. When we project our own modern-day ambitions and fears onto prehistoric people, Christopher Ryan and Casilda Heta call that Flintstoning.
So let's piggyback off of that phrase and label any projection of modern human behaviors, desires, anxieties onto futuristic, technologically advanced beings capable of visiting us jetsoning.
Some examples of jetsoning involve thinking that any aliens out there trying to contact us might want to hurt us. Maybe that's simply because whenever we have met new people, we often enslave them or pity them or take advantage of them. It's also possible to think that aliens will be friendly. They'll want to help us. The ways we imagine them helping us say a lot about the kind of help we think we need. There's a poetic idea that from space, Earth looks peaceful. All of the boundaries we have put up don't exist. You can't see them. But that's not entirely true. The old boundary between East and West Germany is still visible from space, each side using different light bulbs. And this is the boundary between Pakistan and India. You can see from space India flooding the border with lights to deter smugglers from bringing across weapons and ammunition. We don't all get along together here on Earth. We are afraid of each other, we don't trust each other, and the wrinkles and scars that causes are visible from space. Imagining how aliens would interpret that, communicate with us, and how we would or should respond teaches us a lot about ourselves. It makes our struggles strange again, less ignorable, and that is the entire point of fantasy. G.K. Chesterton said that the function of the imagination is not to make strange things settled, so much as to make settled things strange. And as always, thanks for watching.
Лагiem? Sosif? Yeah! Hi! Visos? Mayhel here.
You can practice speaking backwards, so when your words are reversed, they're intelligible. But here's something else that is weird. The digits in the speed of light are exactly the same as the latitude of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And, as the anagram genius has revealed, all the world's a stage, but if you rearrange the letters in the meaning of life, it becomes the engine of a film, or more pessimistically, the fine game of nil. What does all of this mean? Are these just coincidences, or are greater powers at work? Why is it so easy for us to find hidden messages? Why can a mere coincidence give us chills? And why is it so fun? When you reverse Neil Armstrong saying small step for man, you can hear what sounds like man will spacewalk.
That's one small step for man, Small step for man, never let fall. Small step for man, never let fall.
Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated President John F. Kennedy, and in this interview, he defends the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, of which he was a member.
The fact that I did live for a time in the Soviet Union gives me excellent qualifications to repudiate charges that Cuba and the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is communist controlled.
Now listen to what it sounds like when we reverse him saying, "and the Fair Play for Cuba."
And the Fair Play for Cuba, Louis the President. Louis the President. Louis the President.
Is that a coincidence, or a subconscious confession hidden within his own words? It's a coincidence. For crying out loud, if anybody says, "and the Fair Play for Cuba," and then reverses it, it sounds the same. This app, by the way, is called Virtual Recorder. It's a really easy way to quickly reverse your own speech. Matthew Hudson, in The 7 Laws of Magical Thinking, points out that if you record yourself saying, "Ooh, you sniff turkey fat," and then reverse it, it sounds a bit like "Happy birthday to you." Kind of. If a word can be spelled the same forward and backward, it's a palindrome. But if a word or phrase sounds the same, whether spoken forward or rewound, it is a phonetic palindrome. For example, say yes. Reversed? Say yes. Pretty cool. But check out this poem by Karsten Johansson. When I wonder why what's never been's never been so, we would lie when we say, yes, you know we all love you. What's never been's never been so, hell, we're nowhere now. Why I wonder what's never been so, we will lie when we say, yes, you know all that we was never been so, we all were nowhere now. By the way, some people can speak in reverse on the fly. It is really cool to see them in action. Watch guys lean back after this video. It's linked down in the description, and it's full of pretty cool coincidence videos. Apophenia is the perception of connections or patterns in information. One type of apophenia is pareidolia, the seeing or hearing of things that weren't meant to be there. For instance, hearing your name being called or your phone ringing and the sound of running water, or hearing English words in a non-English song, or seeing faces that weren't purposefully placed there. Our brains are good at this kind of work, probably because being hyper-attentive to patterns and faces can save your life. If there's ambiguity as to whether that thing hiding in the shadows is a threat or just a shadow, it's advantageous to err on the side of threat. Organisms with a healthy sense of apophenia live longer, long enough to have kids and raise them and naturally become the norm. We connect with faces so well. Hudson relates a story of a friend who draws faces on things she doesn't want to lose, like her bags. She says the faces make her less likely to forget about them. If you like it, you should have put a ring on it. If you like not losing it, you should have drawn a face on it. We are so good at teasing out patterns and faces from random noise. Actual random sequences don't always feel random to us. Originally, Apple's iTunes Shuffle feature generated complaints from users. They said that similar songs or songs from the same artist appeared in a string, which of course is to be expected from randomness, but it didn't feel random enough. So, Apple introduced a smart shuffle that avoided totally random sequences that nonetheless didn't seem random to our pattern-loving brains. As Steve Jobs explained, we're making it less random to make it feel more random. Our impressive ability to imagine patterns also expresses itself when it comes to connecting songs and moving images. This dancing Spider-Man animation will famously sync up with any music you play. Try it. What kind of black magic is going on here? Well, as it turns out, most of it is in our heads. Radiolab reported that Michigan State University explains that the major movements of dancing animations like this one or this one, move at typical song tempos, but also contain, like most dance, various other different related rhythms of movement, allowing them to seemingly fit many different tempos. Selection bias helps a lot too. We fall prey to this when we reject all the times animation doesn't really sync, focusing instead on the more surprising times when it does. The bizarre pyramid coincidence mentioned earlier is a lot less bizarre when you consider the fact that we got to control where we placed the decimal point, and that a number of degrees this precise isn't necessary to locate the pyramid. By the fourth decimal, we're only talking about a matter of a few meters, so it's easy to make the rest fit the speed of light exactly and have still picked a point on the pyramid. Confirmation bias also comes into play here. If you really want two things to sync up, they will. We often look for evidence that supports what we already believe while marginalizing things against it. As Marshall McLuhan said, "I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't have believed it." These biases also help explain the seemingly mind-blowing coincidence that famous movies and famous albums can line up. One of the most popular states that if you start playing Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon at the same time as The Wizard of Oz, they will eerily line up. Entire communities have sprouted around the syncing of movies and albums. Some of my favorites are the Yellow Submarine soundtrack and The Little Mermaid, Lord's Pure Heroine and Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn 2, and the end of 2001 A Space Odyssey with Pink Floyd's Echoes. There are conspiracies that these were somehow secretly planned, though in reality they're just accidental music videos, the product of selection bias, confirmation bias, and the law of near enough, a behavior of our pattern-sensitive minds. Two things don't have to line up exactly or literally for us to see a connection. This is why vague predictions are a great way to look psychic. These are also actually unsurprising when you consider the fact that the number of narrative paces and rhythms we enjoy and typically use are much smaller than the number possible. In the improbability principle, David J. Hand calls this the probability lever. What may be rare on average, or when considering all possible scenarios, can be less rare for specific scenarios, even if they are only marginally different. Getting struck by lightning is a proverbially unlikely event, but Walter Summerford wasn't just struck by lightning once during his life, he was struck 3 times. It never killed him, but 4 years after his death, his gravestone was also struck by lightning. What are the chances? I mean, clearly Summerford was some sort of robot built out of lightning rods, or had somehow angered Zeus, right? Probably not. You see, while for the average person, the chance of being struck by lightning is quite low, for an avid outdoor sportsman like Summerford, it's not as low. The law of truly large numbers also comes into play here, with lightning striking Earth 40 to 50 times a second, billions of people for it to strike, and thousands of years of recorded history. It's actually not surprising at all that at least once a story like Summerford's would have happened. Given the truly large number of people who visit Disney World every day, and the fact that they take photos and lots of them, it's actually not surprising at all that at least once so far, a story like Alex and Donna Voutsinis's has happened. While sorting through old photos before their wedding, Alex and Donna found a photo of Donna at Disney World 14 years before the couple met. But then Alex noticed something. He too had visited Disney World as a child, and there, in the background, was his father pushing him in a stroller. Sometimes coincidences can be tragic. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Lincoln, was saved from serious injury or possibly even death when a stranger grabbed him by the shirt collar moments before he plunged onto train tracks below. That stranger turned out to be Edwin Booth, one of the most famous Shakespearean actors of the time. So famous, in fact, Robert recognized him and had a letter sent thanking him for saving his life. Less than a year later, Edwin Booth's brother, John Wilkes Booth, undid the favor by assassinating Abraham Lincoln. Strange as they seem at first, math says that given enough time, and psychology says that given enough interest in finding them,
coincidences and connections will be found, even unlikely ones. The coincidences between Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy are famous. Both were elected to the presidency in a year ending with 60. Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater. Kennedy was shot in a 1961 Lincoln Continental four-door convertible made by Ford. Both presidents' last names have 7 letters, and both assassins had 15 letters in their names. The list goes on, as it should. If you look long enough, you can find coincidences between any two people or things or events. They may seem strange at first, but tend to wind up being, in the end, pretty expected. For just one example, name length isn't that wildly variable. 7-letter names are pretty common. Lincoln, Kennedy, Michael, Stevens. In the famous Spooky Presidential Coincidences contest held by the Skeptical Inquirer in 1992, one contestant alone found similar lists of crazy coincidences between 21 pairs of former presidents. Given the vast amount of details in any one of our lives, it's pretty easy. This quirk can be exploited to almost comedic heights when it comes to overanalyzing. Of course, hidden messages and signs are often intentionally included in media for fun or to reward attentive viewers. But unintentional, extraordinary things happen all the time. It's not really that extraordinary. There's a famous calculation that is known as Littlewood's Law. Given the number of hours we are awake every day, and assuming an event only takes about a second to occur, if you calculate the odds of something happening to you are only 1 in a million, well, you should expect that thing to happen to you about once every 35 days. David J. Hand took this even further with 7 billion people on Earth. The chance that an event with a 1 in a million probability of happening to each of us won't happen today is 1 in 10 to the 3,040. As Percy Diaconis put it, the truly unusual day would be a day where nothing unusual happens. And as always, thanks for watching. You may have noticed a lot of YouTube channels making videos about learning this week. Well, that is not a coincidence. It is School of YouTube Week. Many people are going back to school or college right now, but across the world, millions of children won't be, either because they work to support their families, or live without a home, or in areas where there is conflict. They may experience overcrowding in school or a lack of teaching and school supplies. But luckily, we can help. Donations to Comic Relief's School of YouTube campaign can help disadvantaged young people all around the world get an education. It doesn't take much to change a life. You can learn more in the description below or donate right now. And as always, thanks for helping and thanks for learning.
Everyone is scared of something, but is there something that everyone is scared of? What is the scariest thing possible?
Hey, Vsauce. Michael here. Fear gives us life. Being afraid of the right things kept our ancestors alive. It makes sense to be afraid of poisonous insects or hungry tigers. But what about fear when there is no clear and obvious danger? For instance, a teddy bear with a full set of human teeth. Or a smile.jpg. There's something a little off about these images, too much mystery and strangeness. But no obvious fear, the way there is with a gun or a falling rock, but yet they still incite fear because they are creepy. But why? What gives us the creeps? What causes something to be creepy? We are now in my bedroom, the bedroom I grew up in Kansas. Like a lot of children my age, I was terrified of scary stories to tell in the dark. But the very first book that ever scared me was The Curse of the Squirrel. To this day, I still haven't finished the book, but that's just me. Psychologist James Geer developed the Fear Survey Schedule 2, which he used to find out what scared us the most. Combined with the results of a more recent Gallup poll, these are the things that scare most of us the most. All of these things are scary, but are they creepy? Let's get more specific. I love the way Stephen King delineates 3 types of scary stuff. The first is the gross out. This is something disgusting, morbid, diseased. The second is horror. Horror to King is the unnatural, a giant spider, or being grabbed in the dark when you thought you were alone. The third, terror, is different, creepier. He says terror is coming home to find that everything that you own has been replaced with an exact copy. Terror is feeling something behind you, its breath on your neck, knowing that you will be grabbed, but then turning around to find that there was never anything there in the first place. Not a lot of research has been done on that feeling, the creeps, but many theories and ideas involve vagueness, ambiguity. For instance, masks and why clowns are creepy. Claude Lévi-Strauss wrote that the facial disguise temporarily eliminates from social intercourse the part of the body which reveals personal feelings and attitudes. Part of the reason even a neutral or happy mask can be creepy may have to do with ambiguity. A mask hides the true emotions and intentions of the person underneath. I don't know if the person wearing that mask is a threat or not. Vagueness is creepy when it comes to the human form. This is the famous uncanny valley. On a chart of humanness, there's a zone where something can be almost entirely human, but off by just a little. Not so wrong that it's clearly fake or funny, or so good that it's indistinguishable. Instead, it's just troubling. The creepiness of the uncanny valley is wonderfully demonstrated by John Bergeron's Singing Androids. Watch these videos when you're alone. A similar uneasy feeling comes from Shay St. John, a character created by Eric Fournier, funny to some, nightmare fuel to others. Uncanny humanoids, like all creepy things, straddle a line between 2 regions that we can understand and explain with language. Francis T. McAndrew and Sarah Kohnke describe being creeped out as an adaptive human response to the ambiguity of threats from others. Creepy things are kind of a threat, maybe, but they're also kind of not. So our brains don't know what to do. Some parts respond with fear, while other parts don't, and they don't know why. So instead of achieving a typical fear response, horror, we simply feel uneasy, terror, creeped out. Between the mountains of safety and danger, there is a valley of creepiness, where the limits of our knowledge and trust and security aren't very clear. Will looking at this cause you to die 1 week later? Impossible, right? Maybe. That's the terror of ambiguity. We don't do well with ambiguity. When it involves our own intentions, it can make us lie. And when it involves danger, but no recognizable threat, it can make us think and feel some pretty weird things. Have you ever peered over a ledge, a railing, way high up, like so high up it made you nervous and dizzy, and felt something pushing you? Maybe even an urge to jump. Have you ever stood on a ledge with a loved one and realized that you could push them? It would be that easy. You really could do it. And maybe you do want to do it, or maybe it's just cognitive dissonance. The fact that your brain is having to deal with ambiguity. A recent study by Jennifer Hames at Florida State University dubbed this the high place phenomenon. When approaching a ledge and a dangerous drop, your survival instinct kicks in and you pull yourself away. But your balance and motor systems don't get it. Nothing is pushing you, and you don't normally fall or leap randomly. So what's going on? The part of your brain that processes intention might resolve this by determining that something must be pushing you, or that you might actually want to jump or push your friend, even if none of that is true. Now, we're not done with ambiguity yet, because our language reflects the gray area of terror and creepiness. Take a look at the word terror itself. We have horrible and horrific, terrible and terrific. Why is that? Well, through history, we never really figured out what to call powerful experiences, because they're both. They are full of awe, awesome, and they are full of awe, awful. We need them to survive. We need fears and the creeps to understand our size, our weaknesses. But on the other hand, avoiding them is pretty great too. The creeps is a physical reminder that the world is vague and full of ambiguity, but that we are cunning, always trying to figure things out, but nonetheless fragile. Is that terrible or terrific? Well, it's both, which, as a creepy ghost would say, is kind of beautiful. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey, Vsauce! Michael here. I am distorted. The pixels you are watching have been time displaced. They've been mapped onto a gradient, and the darker the region they're mapped to, the further behind they lag. The effect is really fun, but it's certainly not realistic. Or is it? Many popular digital cameras suffer from lag-induced distortion, like what you just saw, though much more subtle, usually completely unnoticeable. It's called a rolling shutter. Instead of snapping a full exposure at once, they quickly scan strips of each frame. It's usually undetectable, but when the subject changes faster than the camera scans, you get the famous jello-y, wobbly, rolling shutter effect. Really fast things like vibrating guitar strings and airplane propellers are famous victims, but people can be too. Luke Mandel submitted this photo to Boing Boing. His camera scans left to right, and in this instance, managed to capture a blink, eyes closed when the scan began, and then open in the reflection scanned a fraction of a second later. But the rolling shutter effect is not just a neat curiosity. It represents a fundamental and inescapable distortion that affects everything we see, rolling shutter or not. First things first, let's talk about distortions. A hallucination is a distortion of reality when there is no apparent stimulus. If you are merely misinterpreting an actual stimulus, that is an illusion. But some distortions occur before our sense organs and minds get in the way. They are called optical phenomena. They are not the result of sensation or perception gone wrong. Instead, optical phenomena are distortions caused by the mere properties of light and matter in and of themselves. If you look up at the sky and see a giant, vivid drinking gourd, you are hallucinating. But if you see a flat, two-dimensional connect the dots Big Dipper, you are seeing an illusion. It's an illusion because those dots merely appear to be on the same plane, like holes poked in the dark roof of the sky. In reality, those dots are stars, light years apart from one another in 3 dimensions. As Celestia's brilliant free real-time 3D visualization of space shows, from different perspectives besides our own, they look a lot less like a dipper or plow. In fact, all constellations and asterisms are geocentric illusions. From a wider perspective, their outlines point inward to the single, lowly point in space that gave them their names. But you can't blame us. I mean, Earth is the only perspective any human has ever had. And even Voyager 1, the most distant man-made object, is still not even close to being far enough away for the constellations to look even remotely different than they do here on Earth. It's also not our fault, our eyes and brains' fault, that distant stars weren't included in our early Cosmic Connect the Dot game. Sure, our eyesight could be better, but optical phenomena are also to blame. If it weren't for redshifting and the inverse square law and light extinction, distant things could be seen in all their glory. The night sky would look phenomenal. Many structures up there are huge, that are just too dim for their hugeness to be appreciated. When we see Hubble telescope images of distant objects like the Helix Nebula, it's easy to think that without a telescope to zoom in, the object must just be a tiny point in the sky. But in reality, even though the Helix Nebula is 700 light years away, it's 3 light years across. If we could make the Helix Nebula less dim, if our eyes could take a really long exposure of it, we would see the Helix Nebula as it really is, nearly 70% the apparent diameter of our moon. This is a serious picture. That is how large the Helix Nebula would appear in the night sky from Earth if it just wasn't so dim. Our moon is tiny in the sky, by the way. It's easy to think of the moon as this huge baseball-sized thing up there in the sky, but that's an illusion. Try this the next time you see the moon. Grab a sheet of notebook paper, and you will notice that the angular diameter of the moon is the same size as a hole punched in a sheet of notebook paper held an arm's length away. Seriously, try it sometime. It shows just how cute and tiny our little moon is. The Orion Nebula would appear even larger if we saw all of its light, and the Andromeda Galaxy, just a smudge in the sky to our eyes, but if our eyes were better at collecting dim light, we would see Andromeda's true extent in our sky. Of course, our night sky doesn't look like that. Distant objects are dimmer. That's a bummer, but light still wins when it comes to speed. Light travels at the fastest speed. In fact, in a vacuum, light travels 300,000 kilometers a second. That's fast. But not really. I mean, not compared to how far apart things are in the universe. Sydney, Australia is 1/14th of a light second away from London. But the Andromeda Galaxy is 2.5 million light years away from London. To put that in perspective, let's take a light speed journey from London to Sydney. It would look like this. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go. Nice. All right. Here's the Andromeda Galaxy. Okay. Now, relativistic effects aside, let's take a look at what it would look like to travel toward the Andromeda Galaxy at the speed of light. Are you ready? All right. 3, 2, 1, go! Yeah. I mean, seriously, it's pretty lame. Even at the speed of light, the fastest speed possible, a year from now, we won't even be a millionth of the way there. That's how far away Andromeda is. It's almost sad, in a way. But this brings us back to the rolling shutter effect. The Andromeda Galaxy is huge. It's more than 100,000 light years across, and our view of it is tilted, which means that on the plane we view it in, light from the back represents what Andromeda looked like thousands and thousands of years before what light from the front represents. Changes in its appearance reach us sooner from the front than from the back. Andromeda is rotating, spinning at hundreds of kilometers per second in some places. Now, a lag between light coming from near and far points on a spinning object results in a skewed image, the rolling shutter effect on a cosmic scale. Applied to, say, a chessboard, seeing the front ahead of the back is pretty trippy and dramatic. So, does that mean we see wobbly, funhouse mirror, rolling shutter effect versions of Andromeda and other distant galaxies? Well, technically, yeah. But the distortion is negligible. It may as well be ignored. Why? Well, the speeds used in these visualizations are not to scale. On average, yes, matter within galaxies orbits the galactic center at hundreds of kilometers per second, but galaxies are so huge, it takes them hundreds of millions of years to complete just one rotation. In other words, the lag between light reaching you from near and far points on a galaxy is nothing compared to how much time it takes matter in the galaxy to travel that same distance. In the case of Andromeda, if you insisted on seeing Andromeda as it really is, that is, corrected for any lag caused by the fact that the speed of light is finite, the most extreme points on the galaxy would only need to be adjusted by about a 10,000th of the width of any image. In this case, less than a pixel. So it's not a big deal. But it's not a nothing deal. It's real. In fact, everything we look at is in some way distorted by the fact that the speed of light is finite. Your own feet are about 5 to 6 light nanoseconds away from your eyes, which means when you look at your feet, you are seeing where they were 5 to 6 nanoseconds ago, 5 to 6 nanoseconds in the past. Of course, a delay that brief is pretty much undetectable, but it is calculatable. If it makes you feel a little sad to know that even with the sharpest mind or the best instruments, appearances still depend on where you are, that optical phenomena ensure appearances are always relative, don't feel bad. We call the people closest to us our relatives. We're really just a family. A big family of reference frames that, like a family, don't always agree, but do have plenty of cool things to look at. I'd like to thank my editor, Guy, for help with the rolling shutter effect in this video. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. This appears blue, this appears yellow, and this appears green. Those of us with normal color vision can probably agree, but that doesn't change the fact that color is an illusion. Color as we know it does not exist in the outside world beyond us, like gravity or protons do. Instead, color is created inside our heads. Our brains convert a certain range of the electromagnetic spectrum into color. I can measure the wavelength of radiation, but I can't measure or observe the experience of a color inside your mind. So, how do I know that when you and me look at a strawberry, and in my brain, this perception occurs, which I call red, that in your brain, a perception like this doesn't occur, which you have, of course, also learned to call red. We both call it red, we communicate effectively, and walk away, never knowing just how different each of our internal experiences really were. Of Of course, we already know that not everybody sees color in exactly the same way. One example would be color blindness. But we can diagnose and discuss these differences because people with the conditions fail to see things that most of us can. Conceivably, though, there could be ways of seeing that we use that cause colors to look differently in different people's minds without altering their performances on any tests we could come up with. Of course, if that were the case, wouldn't some people think other colors looked better than others, or that some colors were more complementary of others? Well, yeah, but doesn't that already happen? This matters because it shows how fundamentally, in terms of our perceptions, we are all alone in our minds. Let's say I met an alien from a faraway solar system who, lucky enough, could speak English, but had never and could never feel pain. I could explain to the alien that pain is sent through A delta and C fibers to the spinal cord. The alien could learn every single cell and pathway and process and chemical involved in the feeling of pain. The alien could pass a biology exam about pain and believe that pain to us generally is a bad thing. But no matter how much he learned, the alien would never actually feel pain. Philosophers call these ineffable, raw feelings qualia. And our inability to connect physical phenomenon to these raw feelings, our inability to explain and share our own internal qualia, is known as the explanatory gap. This gap is confronted when describing color to someone who has been blind their entire life. Tommy Edison has never been able to see. He has a YouTube channel where he describes what being blind is like. It's an amazing channel. In one video, he talks about colors and how strange and foreign of a concept it seems to him. Sighted people try to explain, for instance, that red is hot and blue is cold. But to someone who has never seen a single color, that just seems weird. And as he explains, it has never caused him to finally see a color. Some philosophers, like Daniel Dennett, argue that qualia may be private and ineffable simply because of a failure of our own language, not because they are necessarily always going to be impossible to share. There may be an alien race that communicates in a language that causes colors to appear in your brain without your retina having to be involved at all, or without you having to have ever needed to actually see the color yourself. Perhaps even in English, he says, given millions and billions of words used in just the right way, it may be possible to adequately describe a color such that a blind person could see it for the first time. Or you could figure out that once and for all, yes, or no, in fact, you and your friend do not see the same red. But for now, it remains the case that we have no way of knowing if my red is the same as your red. Maybe one day our language will allow us to share and find out. Or maybe it never will. I know it's frustrating to not have an answer, but the mere fact that you guys can ask me about my internal experiences, and the mere fact that I can ask my friends, and we can all collectively wonder at the concept of qualia, is quite incredible, and also quite human. Animals can do all sorts of clever things that they can use tools, problem solve, communicate, cooperate, exhibit curiosity, plan for the future. And although we can't know for sure, many animals certainly act as if they feel emotions, loneliness, fear, joy. Apes have even been taught to use language to talk to us humans. It's a sort of sign language that they've used to do everything from answer questions to express emotion or even produce novel thoughts. Unlike any other animal, these apes are able to understand language and form responses at about the level of a 2.5-year-old human child. But there's something that no signing ape has ever done. No ape has ever asked a question. Joseph Jordania's Who Asked the First Question is a great read on this topic, and it's available for free online. For as long as we have been